We originally were set him up last week to come on, Bruce Fein, former top counsel to the FCC. He's the lawyer that went to Reagan and Congress and got the fairness doctrine of not letting you have talk radio and, quote, be partisan. That, hey, I don't support Obamacare. Couldn't say that. Google's coming out now with their own fairness doctrine saying they'll decide what websites to be promoted and linked to, and Democratic Party groups connected to Soros are running it as usual. Bruce Fein, again, is a best-selling author. He has a blog daily in the Washington Times that you can find there. And he's going to cover the waterfront with us here on that issue, with currently with Israel, his take on Russia, Ukraine, but mainly the 300-plus pages that the FCC had won't release. He won't testify before Congress. I can't remember this type of arrogant behavior. Bruce Fein's a constitutional lawyer. He was Ron Paul's domestic and foreign affairs advisor in his presidential campaigns. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to foreign affairs as well as domestic. So I appreciate Bruce Fein joining us. Bruce, let's get into this situation with Israel first. What's your take? You heard my breakdown.
Yes, I did. I think one of the first things the audience should remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu also testified before Congress in 2003 regarding the invasion of Iraq. And at that time, he testified unequivocally that he knew Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that he would use them. He also said that, in his view, the cure of Middle East ailments was to democratize the region. As it's become undemocratized with Arab Spring. And anybody who could think you could take political cultures that are pre-Magna Carta or pre-1215 in development and democratize them really needs their head examined. It would be like asking Netanyahu to solve the problem on the West Bank by democratizing Hamas,
Sure.
It just isn't going to happen. And, of course, we followed Netanyahu's advice and ended up spending $3 or $4 trillion to make Iran stronger, the hegemon in the region. So why are we asking advice from someone who got it so wrong the first time? Aside from the recognition, I'm not blaming Prime Minister Netanyahu. His interests are being reelected and in Israel, not the United States. So he obviously has a conflict with the U.S., so why are we paying so much attention to him?
And by the way, the Israelis are saying that and even blocking out some of his speech if it's political. And he doesn't have unified total support. I'm not attacking Netanyahu either. It's just that the right wing in this country, and we're more conservative, has this idea we do whatever Netanyahu says no matter what. Well, it's just not our fight.
No, you're right. No, and if I can divert for just a moment here, as a joke said years ago that Netanyahu was asked whether he wanted Israel to become the 51st state of the United States. He said, "Are you kidding? And lose 100 votes in the Senate? No way." But we need to remember our interests are oftentimes aligned with Israel's, but not always. But our interests should trump Israel's interest. We have no interest in interfering or permitting our politics to be manipulated by Israel for their own domestic affairs. It just wins us enemies. And moreover, although I say we're often aligned with Israel, we shouldn't be subject to the baggage when Israel makes a decision we think is misconceived, and sometimes they do. After all, it was the Israelis who ultimately were the supporters of Hamas to oppose at that time Yasser Arafat.
Sure.
So they can make mistakes, and we shouldn't be tied to their mistakes. I also think it's important to, as you're pointing out, to remember, deterrence. There is, I think, this suggestion that we're dealing with maniacs in Tehran who don't have a desire to survive, and that unlike the Soviet Union or North Korea or Pakistan or others, they can't be deterred, even though, as you point out, they would be incinerated if they ever used a nuclear weapon. They don't even have one, maybe capability at some time. Deterrence has worked. It worked in the Cuban Missile Crisis against a far more formidable adversary. Iran negotiated an end to the war with Iraq in 1980 to 88. When we shot down one of their passenger planes over the Persian Gulf, they got reparations. They didn't attack and declare war against the United States. And they exercise realpolitik like others, even if they're imbalanced. Even Adolf Hitler didn't use chemical weapons in World War II. They have, a desire of self-preservation. I'm certainly in favor of threatening them with total incineration if they ever used a weapon.
What about the Saudi Arabia wild card? We know Saudi Arabia is in there pushing for war with Iran more than Israel.
Yeah, and again, for number one, I think the wild card's a little less pronounced because the price of oil has plunged and we don't need so much Saudi oil. But it is another example where we're being played by other countries to do their bidding. You know, the United States comes first. Our citizens' interests come first. We pay the taxes. We obey the laws. We fight for the country. And we cannot permit, Saudi Arabia to manipulate things. I mean, one thing that I'd like Saudi Arabia to do is urge the president and the Congress to release these 28 classified documents that suggest they may have been up to their elbows in 9/11 itself. And
sure.
Here we have more than 10 years after the 9/11 Commission report. We don't even know what that connection is because of the secrecy. But Saudi Arabia, other countries there, all wanting us to get involved in their affairs. We say, our country comes first.
What do you think's really at the bottom of this? Because we know the U.S. and Israel were allied trying to overthrow Syria using really nasty people out of Saudi Arabia and other areas to do it. We now call them ISIS. They were called Al-Qaeda. Now we know we've sided with Iran to try to get control of that out-of-control group. I mean, I don't even know if there is cloak and dagger here. It just looks like a bunch of political wonks that have really screwed things up.
Well, you're right, Alex. We oftentimes try to impute some kind of grand strategy or plan, but there isn't any. I mean, I've worked in government as well. It's all ad hoc based upon the next 24-hour news cycle, and it's just reacting, for the next day. But that is the problem. There isn't any ultimate strategy. There's no goal. Can you imagine a war? Take World War II. If it was defined as the goal was to degrade, the Luftwaffe. I mean, to fight the Japanese Zero aircraft. That's not a strategy. That's just, we go fight to kill. But it has no political objective. There has no definition of what victory is. And that is one of the reasons why we should be out of this. We are in a position where if we didn't, basically take a bayonet and smash a hornet's nest and create a lot of very angry hornets, we have the ability to sit and ensure we are not attacked in the United States. And these other people who are half crazy and fanatical, they'll kill themselves. The Sunnis and Shias have been shooting at each other for 1,000 years. Why should we get involved in their dispute? We don't wish misery on anybody else, but we got to be smart enough to know all we can do is create anger towards ourselves and make ourselves less safe, and that is just stupid. Bruce
Fein, the former head lawyer at the FCC who got rid of the Fairness Doctrine, we owe talk radio and so much of freedom of speech on the internet to your initiative, and I know you don't like credit for it, but you are the guy that did that, and a lot more. But you also assisted Bob Barr in drafting articles of impeachment against William Jefferson Clinton. I mean, you are a guy that gets stuff done. You've served on the bar of the American Bar Association Task Force on presidential signing statements. I mean, I'm not going to go over everything you've done. You represented Edward Snowden's father over the Orwellian surveillance of American citizens. I mean, you are a classical Americana do-gooder. Bruce Fein is our guest. We're going to break here in about a minute and a half. We're going to come back and get into free speech issues until 40 after when you leave us and look at this FCC power grab, in my view. But before we do that, putting a bookend on this, what do you expect out of Netanyahu's speech? What do you think it's really all about? Grandstanding to get reelected, or is he trying to sell an Iran strike?
He's trying, I think, to do both. I think he thinks the two converge, but we need to remember he's a politician. It's by definition he's trying to promote his reelection. But I do think that also he believes that his reelection chances are bolstered the more he can suggest he wants to take out the nuclear equation in Iran, as was done years and years ago in the Osirik in Iraq. I, however, believe that his ultimate presentation will be largely a 1 or 2 day affair, and it's hyped here in the United States because it underscores the divergence between a Republican Congress and a Democratic White House. But I don't think the ramifications will endure more than 48 hours.
I agree. I think they're using it as just another balkanization issue to divide everybody, just like Soros has been caught funding the anti-police garbage. Also, after we talk about FCC issues that you're the prime man to talk about, I want to ask you about the Chicago Black site, because I know you're really key on due process being key to everything. Bruce Fein's our guest. I'm Alex Jones. Gave birth to the rebirth of the First Amendment so we can have talk radio, and change the ideas, because I've researched this, I'm not just saying this about our guest, about how the FCC should operate to promote the First Amendment, not degrade it. But I'm being partisan here because it's a fact. Under Obama, we have seen an acceleration towards it to censor and control. We've heard senators say, use the FCC for a fairness doctrine. Take over cable. Take over movies. Take over print. When it's online, we need to protect the public from hate speech. But how better to fund it than for George Soros to give $196 million to bill it as net neutrality? Now, I haven't gotten Bruce's take on this current fiasco yet, but we'll find out. As best I can tell, sir, and you're the expert on this, this is a Trojan horse, and they won't release the 332 pages, and he won't testify to Congress. What is going on?
Well, I think it's a usurpation, again, of the executive branch of the legislative authority of Congress. And think of this rather bizarre element to this net neutrality ruling. On the one hand, the commission, the three Democrats, conclude that, the antitrust laws, the anti-monopoly laws aren't sufficient to protect the public interest and efficient operations of the Internet. On the other hand, they say that there's so little need for it, they're going to forbear from regulating prices and 90% of what they could regulate under Title II. That's called the Common Carrier Regulation. So they're basically just picking and choosing what parts of the statute they want to enforce. That's up to it's an earmark of what Congress should be deciding. There's another element about net neutrality that is equally bizarre, and that is typically, Alex, when you buy a service, you can have various qualities of the provision. For instance, you can fly first class or business class or economy class. You get taken from A to B, but the actual quality of the service varies, and you pay more if you receive higher quality. First class pays more than economy. And net neutrality is trying to say, well, you shouldn't permit people to buy first class tickets. I mean, really? That would seem bizarre to anybody who was taking a plane and, for whatever reason, needed the space, needed the rest or whatever, to have a greater accommodation. And the whole purpose there behind this net neutrality is, some people, especially who are spectrum hogs, who use vastly more bandwidth, shouldn't be permitted to say, well, I'm pay more and I need to get my content to the end user a little bit faster, and I use up more space, and so I'll pay more. I mean, it's the anti-market theory.
Sure, it sounds like something we'd hear out of Venezuela and their ideas of economics.
Yeah, exactly. It's trying to. It's a variation of God's plan, the Soviet method of distributing goods and services, where you have the government deciding, how much and who should be paying what for what quality of internet connection.
But aren't we missing the really big issue here? And correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't this a power grab with the FCC saying that it's now over telecommunications completely, and that it's going to be over future development of that architecture? I mean, that's a huge expansion of the jurisdiction.
Well, certainly it's what I view as a usurpation. And although they claim that for the moment they won't use it to regulate prices in detail, they're claiming that they could if they wish to. And I want to step back for just a moment, Alex, and remind the audience that the antitrust laws, they call them the Magna Carta of economic liberties, they apply in telecommunications, the Internet, like they apply anyone else. So no one's talking about permitting price fixing or abuse of monopoly power. That's already illegal. And we have the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department to enforce them. So while we have the FCC coming back and saying, well, we know better than the Charter of Economic Liberties, how the Internet should be run, especially ridiculous conclusion when it's the Internet that's really the engine. It's the 20 cylinders of our economy that's making things move. Why are you trying to mess up something that's working very, very well? And the answer is, it goes back to politics and, say, disgruntlement with the way the market system works, as most progressives and liberals are. They don't believe in free choice.
Why would the chairman not show up to Congress? That seems very belligerent.
Well, not only that, in my view, Congress has the right not only to the chairman's testimony, but to anybody else's. It's an attempt probably to avoid what could be very embarrassing questions. Congress has the right to overrule by statute anything that the FCC does. Of course, the president could veto it, but that's a congressional prerogative. And to refuse to show up really is another example of how the executive branch has just become almost a one-branch tyranny.
Let's come back with that.
The legislative branch has shrunk to almost a cipher. And I would be holding these people in contempt and fining them each day.
Stay there, Bruce. Fine. One more segment. We're coming right back. You're saying you would sanction people more and more. I mean, I've been